Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will be focused on discussing how to manage identity to ensure agencies are aligned with recent policies, such as the Biden's executive order on cybersecurity and the NIST 800-207 Zero Trust Architecture. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I'm the program manager here at ATARC. I would like to welcome all of our attendees, and a special thanks to Erin Scanlon, Kathy Cromley, Christina Fleer, and the rest of the Beyond Trust and SailPoint team. This afternoon, we are going to hear from our panelists, followed by a Q&A, pop in a few poll questions, and answer your questions. Before we begin, I want to encourage the audience to please submit those questions in the Q&A section of this platform. We'll be going through them during this panel, so please send them in as we go. Also, remember to answer the poll questions to ensure that you receive your CPE credits for attending today's session. I would now like each of our panelists to please introduce yourselves. So come on camera if you haven't already. And please share with us your name, your title, your agency, and anything that you would like the audience to know about you and your organization up top. This would be the time to share that information. Let's start with Ken, please.
Great, thanks, Kirsten. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Myers. I'm the Chief FICAM Architect with the GSA Office of Government-Wide Policy. I've been doing identity stuff for a while. I love it, super interesting. I love talking shop about it. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to come today. I can't wait to talk about it.
Thanks so much. And then over to Robert.
Hi, my name is Robert Hankinson. I guess today I'm the temporary DCIO for foreign operations, but my day job is I'm the director for the Office of Information Technology Infrastructure. So FICAM, encryption, data analytics, PKI, that all falls under me. Actually, so if you look at Ken's background, if you scan his camera left about another street, you see my building. So it looks like we're really close to each other.
Awesome. Over to Ross.
Hi, thank you, Kirsten, and I thank ATARC and both SailPoint and Beyond Trust for having me here. My name is Ross Ford. I'm with CISA, and the program I'm on at CISA is the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program. I've been doing identity management for like 20 years, so it's pretty long in the tooth in this area. On the program, I'm the ICAM SME, and I'm also a senior engineer. I also am the co-chair for the Derived PIV Working Group, which is part of the Federal Mobility Group's Federal Mobility Group that is chartered by the Federal CIO Council. So, and we'll talk more about multi-factor authentication and a little bit about how mobile devices play a really strong role in helping agencies diversify the types of authenticators they can use and support zero trust architectures with that.
Thank you. Over to Josh.
Hi, I'm Josh Broadbent. I am the Director of Solutions Engineering for Beyond Trust Public Sector. I founded a MSP in the South when I was really young. That went on to be a successful MSP. I transitioned into state and local government and then on to identity and access management within SLED, Fed, and Intel. And I've been doing this for almost 25 years now. It seems too long. So
great. And then Frank.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frank Villo. I'm the Global Public Sector Strategist here at SailPoint. I've been involved in federal identity for about 25 years now, going back to the DoD original PKI program. To date myself, the gray is real. Been involved in the federal PKI program, the FICAM roadmaps 1 and 2, and most recently CDM, also involved in a lot of zero trust strategies across DoD, the Intel space, and federal civilian. So I look forward to this conversation. It's always fun, and glad to be here with some of my oldest friends. So this is good. Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. We have a wonderful lineup today. So let's just jump right into it. I want to talk about how government agencies can implement an effective ID security model. With that, I want to turn it over to Ken first. Could you please tell me about your current active project that is helping agencies do so? How did you get started, and what can other agencies take away from your findings?
Great, thanks. Yeah, so I mean, we have an active project going on helping agencies understand, create, and implement a digital identity risk assessment process. So if you're familiar with NIST 863-3, it talks about agencies completing a digital identity acceptance statement. So pretty much what that is, the agency looks at the transactions, the unique roles, and the risk from those transactions and application. You look at what tools you have existing around identity assurance, authenticator assurance, and federation assurance. And then you figure out what is the level to meet the risk of that transaction. So you can think about privileged users and what they can do. You think about regular users if it's a citizen-based application. We've actually already helped 6 agencies. We have a goal this year of helping 8. We've actually helped do a digital identity risk assessment process for a couple of applications. It's been a really exciting process, really great getting out there and helping agencies. If any agency needs help, wants to understand the digital identity risk assessment process, we've actually written a playbook. It's available at playbooks.idmanagement.gov. I'd love to come by, give you a quick demo of the workbook we put together to help you implement digital identity risk assessments.
That's awesome. We'll have to include that resource in the wrap-up email to our attendees. And maybe we can even get you come into our working group at ATARC and share a little bit more about that information, since it's highly applicable to what other agencies are focused on right now. Thank you for sharing that. And then, Robert, I want to kind of touch on what do you believe is the first thing agencies need to do in order to implement this effective ID security model? What are the first steps? What should they be looking for?
So first off, you need to collect all your identity sources, right? So they are widespread, and when we started down this path, we really started collecting it. We were amazed to see exactly how many are out there. We're not a small organization, so we weren't expecting there to be few, but we were still surprised at how many there actually were, and in how many situations even individual applications had their own identity sources. So collecting those and understanding what they're used for, how they're leveraged, how they're protected, everything soup to nuts, what your identity is incredibly important, because from there you've got to go find, you should try to scale that back down into a more manageable enterprise-wide solution that it's really more of a service at that point, and not individual groups doing their own thing. You could set policy around it a lot better that way. You can set safeguards around it a lot better that way. You can monitor it, you can automate it, you can do so much more if you know what you have. And you could go out and you could find these solutions out there that meet your needs. We started this process about 4 years ago. And we're, like I said, a large organization. All of the IT does not fit under my house in IRM. So we had to go to our individual bureaus to find out what they were doing, and set up a tiger team and talk with industry. We brought in a lot of identity providers and asked some very point blank questions of, this is where we're at. How can you help us? And where should we go? And we got a lot of input from industry. We talked with GSA, and we talked with a lot of other agencies as well, to really get a good understanding of what we needed to do. So I would start by looking internally. Don't listen to a commercial, or don't listen to a forum and say, that's what I need, that will fix my need, when you don't know what your need is. So I would start there.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that insight. Ross, can you please explain to our audience, why is it so important, or what is so important about assessing the current identity architecture maturity state? What does this mean, and what advice would you give to agencies looking to implement such a thing?
I think Robert just touched on it, right? That agencies have been managing their identity and their access management capabilities, not all agencies, but largely in a lot of different ways, right? Individual programs and applications have had an identity strategy for their users. And the enterprise has had various types of strategies for that. And all of this was based upon a model that is a difficult model to support these days. And that model was, it was a strong perimeter, and inside the environment, you trusted the people that you let onto your network. Well, both of those things are challenged, right, in this current environment. I think that one of the things that's really important to remember is, and what Robert just talked about, was the importance to do this at an enterprise-wide level, because you need to have consistent policies in the organization in order to be able to understand, where the risks reside within that organization, and to just get consistent behavior between people doing different things in the organization. I think I want to also say that I think Ken talked about the DIRA, the Digital Identity Risk Assessment, that you can't do that consistently unless you're looking at your applications and you have some structure to provide the identity and access management to those applications in a manner that is common across those different applications. Even if they have different needs, you still need to understand the risk of the users as they come into your environment. And then we'll talk a little bit more about how zero trust affects all this, and the fact that because we don't have a perimeter that we can rely on as as a strong wall around our fortress, we have to make risk-based decisions more often, and those decisions need to be dynamic. They have to be informed by the current risk posture of that application, the risk posture of the individual, and even the risk posture of the devices and maybe the location that the person's coming from.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that. Josh, from your perspective, the industry perspective, what do you believe is appropriate for permissioning identities? Why, or is this imperative to supporting the mission and minimizing risk?
Yeah, so absolutely. As we take a look at what's important from an industry perspective, I think one thing that's important is to make sure that we're looking at PAM and identity management separately. So for identity management, it helps IT teams answer the question, who has access to what? With PAM, we're looking at, are these privileges appropriate for this user? And that's really important as we begin to continue the conversation on identity and zero trust, and where we have attack vectors that we don't know about, or as we're, as Ken alluded to, as we're trying to identify the identity sources that we have inside our network. We need to make sure that as we're bringing these identity sources together, we're not allowing for extra or over provisioning as these users begin to get integrated into a single identity source.
Excellent, thank you. And then Frank, our other industry representative, are there any frameworks or publications that are crucial to the implementation of an effective ID security model that agencies must be looking at in order to ensure their success?
Yeah, absolutely. Ken touched on it. 863 is the big one when we talk about credentials, but we have to unpack that a little bit and what makes that up. We have to go back to 853, which prescribes least privilege that Josh touched on. We have to go back to other compliance frameworks. We may subscribe to the NIST Cybersecurity framework, also the NIST risk management framework. And then there's zero trust. All of those have a impact in our identity strategy. Robert mentioned that the challenges of identifying all those repositories. I call that discovery, just like we do for data protection, and just like the cybersecurity framework calls for. That's the identify state, where we need to understand our identity DNA. We can't protect what we can't see, and we're trying to really, if you think about it, protect the identity and the keys to our kingdom, but really it starts with the identity. We look at all the recent breaches and the impact of those, and it's typically an overprivileged user, an account that hasn't been deprovisioned somewhere, or an over-entitled or overexposed entitlement or piece of data. So we really have to look at these other frameworks and the impact to build that security model. This is a team sport, and you'll hear me say this a lot. Cybersecurity is not a single vendor. It's not a single group within an organization. And until everyone works together, and that's, I've done a number of these presentations with Beyond Trust and some of our other partners, and really it's just the importance of this, that we all need to get along and we all need to work together. And it starts within the organization building that stakeholder team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great insights. Is there anything else that the panelists want to add to the initial question about how government agencies implementing an effective security model can, work to keep pace with adversaries and minimize risk before we move on to another topic?
I'll add one thing on what Frank was saying. So when we're out there talking to agencies, I mean, it's interesting. Part of the risk assessment process is identifying unique roles and then understanding what are the privileges of that role. So it's like, okay, so we have an administrator. Okay, what can they do? Can they create accounts? Can they create other administrator accounts? That seems to be a little bit of a gotcha. And because they can create other accounts, they could potentially create rogue accounts if their account becomes compromised. And so that definitely increased the risk and additional controls around that account.
Yeah, and I'll second that.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting one, Ken.
Was Ross, and then I think Frank was about to speak. Go ahead, Ross.
I was going to say, I'll second that you really need to take really close control over your privileged users, and Josh can talk more about even the right ways to do this, correct? But for the users that have the highest privileges and can do things like Ken just mentioned, creating accounts, you should surveil what those administrators are doing, and even use some forensics capabilities so that if something happens, you can find out where that how that emerged in the system, right? We can do session control and session recording and really get fine-grained about what you're looking at for your most high level privileges.
Any other panelists about to chime in? No? Okay. All right, perfect. So let's move on. I want to discuss best practices for privileged access management, but first let's pop up our first poll question. And I know there was an audience member who asked, how do you get your CPE credits? This is how you get them. So make sure that you answer the poll, which is, where does identity security or privileged access management rank on your list of projects and priorities, whether they are both top or identity is or privileges. The other options include, I'm currently researching IAM/PAM tools to implement. It's an area of focus, but other projects are taking priority right now or not a priority. So please go ahead and answer that poll, and then we'll jump into the next series of questions. So Ken, you had some interesting insights in our prep call. I want to know, what is the FICAM architecture at DHS, and the DHS Continuous Diagnostic and Mitigation Program, so the CDM program for those who are unaware. How do they align in the federal vision for privileged access management? Could you please share your insights on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I talked to Ross a lot about how our programs align and how we complement each other. So the FICAM architecture, it serves as a high-level reference architecture. So it outlines broad services, broad goals, broad capabilities, and that complements what Ross does with the CDM program, and that's more of a solution-based, very tactical-based, where you can actually implement all the fun stuff that in the services that are mentioned in the FICAM architecture. I mean, I'll pass it over to Ross. You can talk more about how CDM.
So,
go ahead, Ross.
And the hierarchy that CDM uses for its IDAM services is the ICAM Office of Government-Wide Policy. Ken's the lead architect, chief architect on. They're the ones that have set the policy and the goals, and then CDM tries to help agencies implement those goals and the solutions that we provide. Now, I always want to say, people say, well, is CDM providing ICAM for the federal government? And my answer is no. It's not possible for a single program to provide ICAM for the entire government. What we do is we try to bring key elements of an ICAM solution, particularly where we see gaps in the federal government that we can help agencies overcome. And then agencies can choose whether to use our, the solutions that we brought or their own solutions. But we do try to get a vision. We do try to help each agency get a good vision of their identity and access management, the risk involved in their solutions in their agency. And then the CDM program takes a holistic view across the federal government by taking summary information from each of the agency dashboards that we collect information in, and show that at the federal level as well. So it's a pretty comprehensive risk view that we try to take, but the foundation for the IDAM architecture is based upon the architecture that the ICAM office does for us.
Thank you for sharing that. So Robert, at the Department of State, how is mapping and tagging resources identities seen as a good practice for privileged access management control? Could you please explain what that is and why it's so important?
So being able to map between identities and the roles, what they do, what they should be able to do, what access and permissions they should have to the actual data itself is essential. If not, you're stuck in that very manual process, that very old process of granting permissions at a very high level. And that's where we see the most activity, the most cyber activity take place, is in that gray area. And so if you don't tag your data very well and you don't mark it well, you don't know what specific roles individuals should have and what permissions they should have, then that gray area is incredibly large and it creates a huge space for adversaries to work in. It's easy to elevate and confuse and create a lot of problems in that space. So that's where they normally work. So that's where the most of your effort should be. Tagging identities, we've mentioned 863 a couple times. I think that's a fantastic document that helps and provides a roadmap for creating those capabilities. But it is just a roadmap, right? So you've got to be able to understand what it means for your organization. You have to bring the data to the table and the processes to the table and the identities to the table and collect all that and then feed it into this format, this framework yourself. But it helps so much to connect the dots and to ensure only those who need the data get the data. So it helps enforce least privilege, which I absolutely think is huge. In my mind, I think everybody's a privileged user. If you're allowed to get on the network, you have some privileges that then can be exploited and then elevated and changed and modified. And we see it all the time. So even though that one particular user does not have anything special other than to log on and then to print, adversaries can get into the memory and sweep and pull more information to then gain further access through other credentials. So staying in front of that, using automation is incredibly beneficial. So having computers watch the network for you and to maintain a baseline security posture for you while you look for those more complicated areas is incredible. And you can't do that without defining roles and and tagging the data up front.
Excellent, thank you. Now, I've heard zero trust mentioned a couple times in these answers, so I want to turn it over to Josh. How does zero trust play into privileged access management? And maybe at a higher level for those who don't know, like, what does zero trust mean to you?
Well, it's interesting that zero trust started as almost a marketing term and a buzzword several years ago, and it's become something that we're steadily redefining into something that's real. The first thing that I like to say whenever zero trust comes up is that zero trust is an architecture or a posture. It's not a product. However many companies out there want to try to sell it as a service or a product, that's not what it is. It's a posture, a direction that we head. And the idea is that we are going to assume, number one, that our identity is our perimeter and that we need to authenticate and authorize that correctly. And number two, that it is very possible that our network's already been breached, so we're not going to trust anything. The idea behind this obviously caught a lot of traction as we looked at things like the SolarWinds breach and other recent breaches that have happened that we have to assume we don't know when or if our networks have been breached. But from that, as we continue that conversation of zero trust, it's also for me about ensuring that users have absolutely the least amount of privileges to what Robert was saying a minute ago. I mean, when you're tagging your data correctly, when you're managing your users correctly, even if they only have access to log in and print, there are still other opportunities that people can pursue or attack vectors that people can take. But one of the postures that we really like to talk about at BT is the idea that we're not going to privilege any of our users. Rather, we're going to leverage policies and intelligence to privilege applications that get elevated. So that way, it doesn't matter what credentials are in memory that someone can scrape, because they literally only get access to the things that they can have access to. So it's all done by policy. It's all done automated. What ends up as a net result is that your users and the users that maybe should be privileged or should be permissioned, they still end up with that experience. So you're not being detrimental to productivity or to the mission that you're trying to support. But at the same time, you have truly enforced least privilege across the users.
Fantastic, thank you. And since we brought up Zero Trust, let's pop up our second poll question for today. Where do you currently stand in Zero Trust architecture implementation? And your options include, what is Zero Trust? Well, hopefully you know now, based off Josh's answer. Researching and starting to wrap my head around how ZTA will benefit my agency. The other option is researching IT cyber tools, starting to implement a ZTA at my agency, or we have our ZTA defined and already rolled out. So please go ahead, answer that if you would like to receive your CPE credits today. And moving on to Frank, I want to ask, what does it mean to align with identity governance for lifecycle automation? And why is this important for privileged access management?
Yeah, just one of the things that we got away from ourselves early on in government when we released or distributed the PIV card was we relied heavily on Active Directory as a broad perimeter for most applications. We didn't control the fine-grained access that users had. So we kind of skipped over the automation process. We still have a lot of agencies doing things manually. We have, through high value asset audits, things like that, especially across the DoD, but in federal civilian as well. These audits have found separation of duties has been a huge issue in audit findings. So that all aligns with that principle of least privilege. So when we take what Josh said about privileged users, that's the what they can do and policy at runtime. But who defines what a privileged user is? That comes as we build the identity from its creation, from its first relationship with the agency. We understand who the person is, whether it's a contractor, an employee, a mission partner. Then we understand their trust elements. And when I mention trust, I'm talking about their background investigation, maybe their clearance level, programs they're read into. Then the credentials that they have, and that aligns with what Ken was saying about 863. Understanding and classifying the users based on the level of assurance. Once we know all those things, we use those as policies before they even get a privileged access to the keys to the kingdom. So those should be our baseline mitigating factors. But identity governance brings in much more. It's the audit process. How are we responding to some of those FISMA audit questions? How are we provisioning and deprovisioning users when someone leaves the organization? We don't pick up the phone and call back and say, hey, I left DHS, remove my privileged account. That should be automatic when something about me or my profile changes. So we're getting to this mode in Zero Trust of contextual access. But there's still underlying processes that are never going to go away that we have to meet as far as regulatory compliance, just answering the auditors and forensics. So identity, and what the theme really is of this whole presentation in my mind is identity is foundational to every little thing we're talking about. Foundational to privileged users, foundational to Zero Trust. We can't get there without building that identity.
Excellent, great answers. So let's jump into audience questions. We had a whole bunch. So let's play a game of stay on mute and then come off mute if you want to answer it so that I know who to call on. First up, what role will behavioral biometrics play in the future of IAM? Who's got that one?
I guess I'll jump in. So behavioral biometrics. So I think it's one of the pieces of the puzzle, or they are pieces of the puzzle. It's one of the attributes that will be added in to make a risk-based decision of whether or not access should be allowed. I'm not a huge fan of biometrics just because they can be spoofed, it can be stolen, then you can't change anything. As a single point, a single attribute to use to authenticate somebody. Everybody sees the movie where they put their thumbprint on the car, on the reader, and then they just get into the castle, right? The big secure area. I think that needs to be a piece, a part of it that then leads into a risk determination. And the more pieces, parts we add, and I mentioned this earlier, the use of computers to help us with that, we can add in these different factors. Where is this person logging in from? How fast are they typing on the keyboard? Is this faster than normal, or is this slower than normal? Are they making errors that they don't normally make? Did they just log in somewhere else that physically they couldn't get from point A to point B on? So I think those two things are additions that can be added into the overall risk understanding for what then develops the identity of the person, leading into the risk score that then gives them the access that they're looking for based off of that.
Excellent. Any other panelists want to add on to that?
Yeah, this is Ross. I'm going to second what he said. And I just want to also highlight, I saw that Bala asked a question too about artificial intelligence. And the ability to do analysis is changing quite rapidly with the emergence of machine learning algorithms and the ability to take large amounts of data. And humans are actually not really very good at looking at a lot of data and coming up with the important anomalies, but algorithms can do a much better job, right? And I think in all of these different areas, whether it's, you mentioned the keyboard typing, well, the person's not really good at determining if you're typing on the keyboard well or not, right? But an algorithm can do a really good job of figuring out if that's a normal pattern for you or different, depending on the keyboard you're on, right? So I think we're going to see a lot more the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning in particular in the near future, and this is an area that will continue to emerge fast.
Great. Additional comments from the panelists on that question?
Yeah. So
Go
ahead, Frank.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I'll let you go.
All right, Frank, then Josh.
I was just going to say, absolutely, to Rob's point and to Ross's point, we kind of tie these two together. Behavioral analytics and biometrics are both critical pieces of this entire story. So just the more it all goes back to that context, right? Of what we're using, one in our risk-based decisions, but also in suitability, right? And to kind of pack on to additionally what Ross was talking about, we started using artificial intelligence and machine learning in access modeling, exactly what Bala is talking about. Looking at the insights of from the life cycle of a user, right? Looking for anomaly changes, looking for outliers. So taking specific, as Ken mentioned, who are all my privileged users that can create an account? What do their peers look like? Should they have that access? Do we have to separate system administrators and system operators? One can create an account, the other can create password for it. So we have that true separation, but using this data to model what our access should look like. And then we're getting to the point where we can have autonomous role modeling, where if the role is no longer needed, remove it. But if there's a new role, suggest it. And we have that power to do that with artificial intelligence now. And you're going to see it across multiple vendors. I mean, this is, as Ross said, it's becoming easy to do, per se, to advance our platforms to be able to do these things. Josh?
Yeah, so for me, as I look at biological biometrics, behavioral biometrics, artificial intelligence, The challenge in those, and we are going to see them become more prevalent, especially as artificial intelligence and behavioral biometrics can begin to recognize sub patterns instead of broader patterns. What I mean by that is, you talk about typing on a keyboard. If somebody has particularly the same rhythm, those are things that can be mimicked. So you have to make sure that we're processing microseconds of how keystrokes happen. And it's going to get there. Absolutely. On a personal note, as long as we're working from home, I hope there's a box I can check for when my kid's sitting in my lap, because I know I type a lot slower when he's in my lap than when he's not. But overall, I mean, this is something that we have to do, right? Especially as we talk about privileged access, and to the points that have already been made, we need to know if a privileged user is trying to log in from a VPN or from an IP address in China, right? So those are all things. But recognizing those behavioral patterns, especially as we get better at recognizing sub patterns, are absolutely going to be a part of, is this actually a valid moment of privileged access, or is this something that's an attempted breach?
Excellent, thank you. I see we have another question about the EO. We'll get to that in a minute because we're about to touch on the executive order. Let's move on to, how do we support a zero trust architecture in a cross-agency collaboration model? Is this a use case that is being considered? Are there additional challenges in implementing zero trust in a cross-agency context? Panelists?
I can talk from a FICAM's perspective. When you're talking about cross-agency, I don't think a whole lot changes. It's still about trusting identities that you did not create yourself, and that seems to have been a challenge for a long time. I mean, when HSPD 12 came out, PIV and CAC cards started being issued. Being able to trust a PIV card that wasn't by your agency was a challenge, and agencies are getting better at it, and now we're getting better at doing federation. We published a single sign-on playbook earlier this year to help with the planning, how to do single sign-on. Part of that is also federating. So that is either accepting credentials or authenticators that you didn't issue, or integrating with other identity providers so that you don't have to create identities on your own that don't belong to your organization.
Yeah, I think, there'll be some challenges, new challenges, right? As we chain more identities, you may have somebody's an identity provider to another system that may be an RP, a relying party for that federation, but then that IDP, that RP then controls a number of applications, right? So in that regard, then it becomes an identity provider to its own level 1 applications, the ones that it manages. And managing the risk, all this risk is going to be, very important. And so let's talk a little bit about one of the things that's at the heart of, the zero trust architecture. Having a risk engine that can look at different signals, evaluate them in context, right? So this would be a context that you'd have to do. Is it a primary authenticator, or did I accept a federation authentication for that individual? You'll have, different levels of assurance of the identity of the individual based upon which method you did. And then secondarily, even when you do accept a federated authentication, you have to operate on that authentication in your environment. So there's an object that gets created in your environment as well. And managing the risk of that object, including what do I allow, what different resources do I allow to get access for that person? That's something you have to do on the local level, even though you accepted an identity from someone else. And it does get complicated, and things like I said, these risk engines that are at the heart of zero trust architectures are the kind of tools that'll be up to the challenge of doing this, because they can take a lot of signals, they can put risk measures on those signals and make decisions accordingly, according to a number of different signals, right?
Robert, were you going to say something?
Yeah, so sorry, and to add in, it's complementary both to what Ken and Ross are both talking about. But for me, I think it's also there's a huge portion of culture that goes into this. A lot of organizations, they just don't want to accept something else that they don't make. Even internally to the Department of State here, we have a hard time with that. We have so I issue the PIV card for the entire Department of State, but we also have USAID. that falls in line with us, and depending on who you talk to, maybe under us or next to us, or that's a whole big other complicated factor. But the simple fact is that we issue the same credential to both houses, but the houses still don't want the credential from branded. So if there's a state PIV card coming in, they don't really want to trust it as much as if it's an aid one. And really the only differences are the ones and zeros that are put on the certificate itself. So there's a culture, there's an understanding portion of it as well. Getting the security folks to understand that the identity structure is certified and it's verified in the same way that we do ours is huge. It could be incredible cost savings as well. So there's the technology portion of it, and I think we're really close with the technology portion of it. And like Ken said, we've been working on for many years the federation aspect of it. But then there's also the culture, the we should be able to trust what other agencies do, and we just haven't gotten there yet. Whether or not we do anything better or worse, we're not evaluating. We're looking at what we issue and say that we issue this, we completely control it. So therefore we must trust it more than anybody else, and everybody else needs to either come on board with what we do or just not get access. And that's a horrible way of thinking about things. We have to have a better way of doing that.
Okay, great.
I was going to say, just to add on to what Rob was saying, was so in the single sign-on playbook, we actually we recommend. I mean, the playbook is non-prescriptive, no shalls, no shall nots. It's all recommendations, but we actually recommend doing federation over direct trust. Part of that is both technology, the protocol, the assertion, what the profile would look like, but it's also on the governance side. So sometimes an MOA between organizations may be required to identify who's responsible for what risk is responsible for what, and just get a good understanding of what each other's responsibilities are.
Yeah, and I think I'll say a little bit about, I guess, my perspective on federated identity is a little different because we operate a couple of shared services that, CDM operates a couple of shared services, one for the non-CFO Act agencies that they get our CDM capabilities, and then the federal dashboard I mentioned earlier, that they both have people coming into those services from across the federal government. And so using a federated approach to those identities is an important and aspect to being successful with those services.
Great. Awesome. Thank you guys for answering that. And then the last audience question we'll answer for now. For better or worse, RBAC, role-based access control, has historically always been the access model of choice, particularly in the federal civilian space. As ABAC, attribute-based access control continues to mature in the intel community. Curious if the panelists think that there are opportunities to develop ABAC more broadly across the public sector and to support zero trust. Their question is, assuming the answer is yes, what kinds of things would the panel like to see industry do in partnership to help drive this type of maturity? I will open it up to any of our panelists to answer that one.
So I think I went first last time, so I apologize if I step on anybody else and jumped in line. But so I think RBAC is the easiest model to implement, and some people feel it's the cheapest model. It's certainly one of the oldest models, so it's kind of the default go-to that we've been working under. But attribute-based access is I think a way of the future. I mentioned it when I answered another question, is that with the biometrics and the machine learning and all that, they're pieces, parts that add into it that build up into that end solution a lot better. One of the troubles I think that we have is defining attributes themselves and their schema that they use around them. What format is the date of birth in? What citizenship, what are the attributes that you need? Getting all of that grouped up in a way that everybody can talk through the same language it's been a little troublesome. I think we could get there if we get out in front of it a little bit more. But I think it's going to help us out quite a bit. And it's going to be an incredible cost savings, I think, as well. If we can let computers and machines do this sort of authentication for us, we can get out of those roles. It's going to make things a lot more secure as well.
Any other panelists want to chime in before we move on?
I think, I mean, Robert said it straight up. The challenge is what do the words mean, right? We actually, RBAC is an attribute-based model, the way you implement it, right? Because you express a role, but that role is being expressed as an attribute, right? That someone on some identity. But I think, the point, most ABAC solutions really want to take in a number of different attributes. And we've made progress around attributes on the devices, attributes in the network. There's adaptive access controls that can consume those kind of attributes because they're environmental and everybody agrees what they mean, right? Where you're coming from and maybe the IP address and yeah. But I think it's harder about human attributes because you have to come up with some taxonomy that you're going to agree of what is the universe of the words going to mean, and that they have to mean something across it. Like for instance, if you use the term administrator means a lot of different things. It means somebody that could be operating in a workplace and helping people get access, just simple access, like, they're an administrator in the system, like my wife was at the public school system. And that could also mean, administrator is the highest privileges in your organization. They have, Microsoft, domain controller administrator privileges, right? And it's really, you really have to find a way to rationalize those terms before you can use them effectively in attribute-based access control. And, I think even working on that is something I think is kind of futuristic. I don't see a whole lot of groups actually trying to tackle that problem.
Yeah, just, I think history has shown us, ABAC has its potential. It definitely hasn't caught on, but I think Zero Trust is driving policy-based access control and attribute-based access control. But I think we have to look, just a little bit at the forensics of some of the breaches that have happened in cloud infrastructure, as an example, because those are federated, basically ABAC models that you use to grant fine-grained entitlements within AWS or Azure. And what that has shown us, take a look at the Capital One breach. It was a result of misconfiguration and the complexity of those non-human readable policies. So we have to understand that there's inherent risk in policy and attribute-based access. We have to have visibility. And when I say visibility, I mean, let's look at that policy and who it actually impacts in a human readable format. Federation, the same way. These are pretty impactful things. From a risk perspective that needs to be understood. And in the space, you'll see like some of the more mature ABAC vendors are actually building visibility into their tools. I'll be self-serving. That's one of the functions of an identity governance tool. We take those complex policies and make them human readable and can audit them or put policies against them. So I think, ABAC is definitely going to catch on. It's a matter of time, but I think we have some maturity and understanding that we have to do and not overstep and move too quickly. Back to you, Kristen.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's move on. I want to talk about how do you manage identity to ensure agencies are aligned with recent policies. I'm thinking Biden-EO and NIST 800-207. So Ken, I want to turn it over to you. What part of the NIST 800-207 is your agency primarily focused on when it relates to aligning together?
Yeah, I mean, within the Office of Government-Wide Policy, we help co-chair the ICAM subcommittee of the Federal CISO Council. We actually have a identity governance working group going on. So we're talking broad governance, not exactly identity like IGA governance. So this is how to structure your program, how to structure an ICAM governing body within an agency. And then we've actually added in, how do our activities moving forward align with zero trust? So within 800-207, we have the 7 principles. So how does this identity activity, this identity process or pattern align with those? So we have talking points when we go to our executives, right? Executive buy-in is very important for them to understand how you can't do zero trust without identity. I mean, you can do identity, but you can't do zero trust without identity. I think I had mentioned earlier, 800-207 said zero trust is heavily dependent on having precise identity management patterns and processes. And it's everything we do now in our office. When we're looking at something, we're looking at how does this align with zero trust? How are we helping agencies implement zero trust through identity?
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then Robert, I want to turn it over to you next. I understand that your agency has started implementing an ID solution. Could you please expand upon that?
Yeah, so our ID solution is, so I'm gonna drop a company here that somebody's going to be excited about. So about 3 years ago, we went through a team effort to find a nice solution, identity solution that fit us. And we talked to so many vendors and so many contractors about what would fit our exact role. So we settled in on a SailPoint solution that really it's been driving us forward. So we're using our SailPoint solution for our on-prem. We've got Radiant Logic that is doing the individual determination or the interconnectivity with those other identity sources, and to be able to link in with them and leverage them and rationalize the data contained within. And then we're using Okta for our IDaaS, our cloud solution. So 3-tier model, and that's the overall infrastructure of what it looks like, and that's what we're marching toward implementing enterprise-wide. Internally, it's tough, but the tools they're actually pretty easy. It's getting the policies and getting the individual separate identity sources collected and putting our hands around all of that really takes the longest amount of time. The tools are great. The infrastructure is great. We just it's hard work getting there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Ross, go ahead.
Houston, I just wanted to add on that the Department of State is not alone in either their vision of their enterprise solution or their challenges with implementing that inside an agency, right? CDM has been helping many agencies, most of the federal government agencies, with some form of identity and access governance and some privileged access management tools. And I think the biggest challenge is the fact that agencies, they have to mature themselves to operate these tools effectively, right? And now there's a big variation in agencies where they were when CDM started their our IDAM services capabilities, and many agencies were already on this journey, but some agencies were not as mature as others, right? And so, but in all cases, it takes time to become optimally capable, right? And I think that's part of what. There's a question about what does the EO mean to CDM, and this is part of it, right? So some of the efforts in the EO are about managing your users better, and CDM will certainly help agencies do that. I think our focus in the next round, beginning now, is helping agencies implement their PAM solutions more effectively, right? Because the privileged users was a really big risk, and that things we learned about that in the latest round. So that'll be a focus area for CDM, but not the only focus area. There's others as well.
Great. Well, thank you for answering that question. Josh, looking towards the future, how necessary will it be to manage identity as the backbone of security on a network? What else does this include in terms of minimizing attack vectors?
Yeah, so of course, as we look to the future, identity is going to be the new security perimeter. We're steadily moving away from the days of firewall and network perimeters as a physical thing, and it's really going to be about identity and who has permissions. And to reference the conversation that we were having a little earlier about attribute-based access control and having artificial intelligence that's building those roles out based on a complex list of attributes. So as we look to the future doing that, applying the principle of least privilege is going to be a very powerful and becoming a well-recognized way to secure these systems. In this way, the accounts or the identities that are there are only given access whenever contextual parameters are met. And then you're able to revoke that access as soon as those contextual parameters are no longer defined. So as we look forward to that identity perimeter moment, it's definitely going to redefine the way that we look at networks. It's going to redefine the way that we look at identities. It's going to redefine the way that we look at zero trust, because all of these identities that exist today are things that we have to take into consideration in their behavior, in their attributes, in what privilege they have. As I think it was Robert that said earlier, I mean, there's no such thing as a non-privileged account, right? Everybody that gets access to a network has a privilege in some form. And that's an identity. That's usually an identity linked to a heartbeat. Sometimes, and more often, becoming more often, it's an identity that may not be linked to a heartbeat. It's an IoT identity. It's a device. So now we have machines that theoretically have identities that are authenticating against networks and authenticating against other resources. And we begin to have to define roles for things that aren't alive. So it becomes interesting.
And Josh, I think what I heard recently is that non-human identities are growing at twice the rate of human identities, even though human identities are growing a lot because of our use of cloud services and you have more accounts and more different services. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And then Frank, I want to turn it over to you. I think you may have touched on this already, but can you expand upon what is the relationship between identity management and zero trust when it comes to ensuring agencies are aligned with these recent policies?
Can you repeat that question? My internet's unstable. I apologize, Kirsten.
Oh yeah, no worries. What is the relationship between identity management and zero trust when it comes to ensuring that agencies are aligned with recent policies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've said it. I think everyone here has said it. The identity is foundational, and there's a lot that goes into that. When we say identity, we are talking about credentialing. We're talking about privileges. We're talking about automation. There's a lot of things that make up that loaded term identity, right? So it's foundational in to build the zero trust architecture that we have complete control, complete visibility. And then we have control and visibility. We can then protect and we can ensure compliance with confidence. So it really is building blocks within the identity domain itself, along with the data and infrastructure domains as well, as Robert was talking about tagging things. We need to tag our data. We need to tag our infrastructures. We need to be able to use metadata about the identity, about the system, and about the data itself, the applications, to build these dynamic policy-based or attribute-based authorizations that we strive for. And that's really the evidence of zero trust. So the identity couldn't be more important now than it ever was.
Great, thank you. Let's see if we can answer this last audience question. This one is for you, Robert. How is zero trust being implemented at the Department of State? Is it at the enterprise level, or will each bureau need to implement their separate zero trust identity management?
So right now it's kind of all over the board. I'm just going to be honest with you. We prior to the Biden EO, we didn't have a lot of focus. We had a lot of people that saw the importance of zero trust and tried to roll in their own. But right now we're collectively trying to understand what this looks like at an enterprise level. Our seniors are talking with each other to make sure that we've got that one single fabric going forward. We're building the architecture now. We have played with this for many years. We know what it looks like in many different ways. Zero trust can be solved in about 10,000 different ways, and we've probably solved it in about 5,000 different ways at the Department of State. Now, so we need to figure out what looks best for the entire department. And we're working toward that right now. I think none of it was wasted effort. We're gonna be able to use pretty much everything that we learned in all of our trials and all of our methods and all of the individual siloed work that's going on. And it all wasn't siloed. It kind of built on top of each other, and teams would split off and solve a problem for today that then we can use on Zero Trust tomorrow. And so it's all coming together in building blocks, and it's adding up into the enterprise solution. But while we're doing that, we're doing it in kind of a funny way, in my opinion. I wouldn't say we're backing into it. We're doing it in fits and starts, and we'll start something and we'll understand what it means a little bit more to us. And then we'll kind of back out of it a little bit, and then we'll add in another piece and then see what that looks like. And then we'll pull back out. And so we're kind of going forward and back in the fits and starts. But at the end goal will be a enterprise-wide solution.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like how it's going with me training my puppy. No, that's awesome. So throw up the last poll question, please, Mel. How familiar are you or your agency with the Digital Identity Risk Assessment Playbook? For those at home, please answer that if you'd like to receive your CPE credits. We are pretty much out of time, but I want to hear final thoughts from panelists, lasting impressions. What do you want to leave our audience with? 30 seconds or less. This is a rapid fire round. Let's start with Ken, please.
Yeah, I would just have to say, we all have similar challenges, but we all have unique solutions to them. And we're all trying to do the same thing. So why not share it together? So most likely there's government-wide working group, government-wide committee that agencies share best practices at. Feel free to join those. If you have specific identity questions, feel free to reach out to our office. That's icam@gsa.gov.
Love that. Thank you, Ken. Over to Robert.
I absolutely agree with Ken. Be part of the conversation. State is part of that conversation with other agencies and other groups. We're in all of the panels that Ken mentioned, all the groups, and we still are going through the fits and starts and understanding what it means for us. Understand the culture of your department, and make sure that your end solution is going to meet the mission need. Not that you're just trying to get the fanciest product out there, or you're trying to get it done as quick as possible, because you're going to miss something. You're going to miss a process. You're going to miss a blaring gap. So it all starts with the culture of your department. It needs to meet the mission, and there's about 10,000 ways that you can do it. So get busy finding which one's the best one for you.
Thank you, Robert. And over to Ross.
Yeah, Zero Trust journey, start now. And if you're going to start, identity is a great place to start. Make it risk-based, right? So take the worst, as Robert said, take the worst problems you have and start applying Zero Trust principles to solving that, because you'll be able to then use those principles again elsewhere.
Thank you, Ross. Over to Josh.
Yeah, for me, just a reminder that, Zero Trust encompasses all identity domains, and that includes privileged access and account management. And those are just a subset of the accounts that have the highest level of permissions. And so when you're looking at Zero Trust, you have to treat PAM and privileged access management as a special use case inside that architecture and do something specific with it.
Thank you, Josh. And over to Frank.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to wrap up what everyone said. I mean, this is a team sport now. I said it earlier. There's a lot of domains that make up the identity that we have to include. But there's a lot of other security disciplines as well. And one of the things that I like to leave people with is, you probably already own a lot of these tools. As we started off and said, Zero Trust is a paradigm shift. It's a concept. It's not a specific product. And a lot of agencies have made significant investment either through CDM or other initiatives, and have a lot of these tools. It's a matter of the implementation, modernization of those tools, and really the operationalizing the identity data. So enjoy, as Ross said, it's a journey. It's not a destination. We'll be doing this for a while.
Fantastic. Thank you, Frank. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today, but I want to thank our partners again at Beyond Trust and SalesPoint and our amazing panelists. Thank you all who are, at home joining us today, and we hope to see you again next week on June 30th from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time for ATARC's webinar on how not to manage a government development project. During this webinar, topic experts will cover ways to increase operational efficiencies, reduce security and compliance risks, and improve enterprise operations by leveraging a single tool chain. We hope to see you there. Everyone have a great rest of your day.